What's up? I've decided to pilot a new initiative, Article Monday, where we discuss an academic article, which is just so much fun. This morning, I was reading Social Psychology Quarterly, Identity Non-Verification, Emotions, and Cognitive and Behavioral Responses. I think this is from the spring 2025 issue. Um, okay, it's by two who's who in identity theory, social psychology. Jan Stets and Peter Burke. And the deal is that they get into this, they've developed this theory, identity control theory and identity theory, two theories. And so they're operating within that framework. And what they've done, they haven't looked at religion. I want to take this article and tell you what I think it means for people who are leaving their religion. But what they've done is they've done this survey of people who, during COVID, in like 2021 or something during COVID, they wanted to see the relationship between what they're calling identity non-verification and people's emotions. So identity non-verification just means I have this identity, like I'm a worker or I'm a mother or whatever it is, and I'm trying to show that identity. I'm trying to live that identity out. I'm a Christian, trying to live that out. I go to live that out, and the response I'm getting from my environment, from other people, does not solicit the response that I want that verifies my identity. So I'm going to read you their abstract, okay? We examine, that's Stets and Burke, examine how 10 emotions that emerge from the identity non-verification process are associated with specific coping strategies that share meanings with these emotions. We study a non-random national quota sample of adults who had problems verifying their identities during the COVID-19 pandemic. The findings support our hypotheses that identity non-verification is associated with an increase in negative emotions such as anger and fear. And today I want to talk about shame, and a reduction in positive emotions such as happiness and hope, and that people engage in coping strategies in response to non-verification. Negative emotions tend to prompt the more negative coping strategies of disengagement. And so I read through the questionnaire that they based their stuff on. And so negative coping strategies of disengagement, you can think of that as things that like shut people down, like shutting off other people. Well, I pulled the questionnaire up somewhere so we can really talk about it. Strategies like substance use, behavioral disengagement, self-blame, denial. I think that's what they mean there. So negative emotions lead to negative coping strategies. Positive emotions, when they occur, which they found a stronger result for positive coping strategies in there, or positive emotions have a stronger effect on people than negative ones in this particular survey that they did. Okay, so positive emotions, when they occur, tend to animate positive coping tactics, like chatting with a friend, things like that. Beyond the valence of the emotion, the meanings of the emotions appear to be related to the meanings of the coping strategies. The results support recent theorizing that people's emotions help them select the cognitive and behavioral responses to identity non-verification. Okay, so what that means is that they have a basis now. This is identity verification theory. This is how identity scholars, identity theorists, people working within social psychology, how they actually quantify what is a particular identity, what is the box made of, and they quantify how people get into and out of that box. That's how I think of it. So thinking about that, that's just their abstract. And then I want to talk a little bit more about some of their discussion and results. They talk about shame here. I just wanted to skip to that. Negative emotions did not turn people away from active or support coping strategies. So when they had these negative responses, this is during COVID, remember, so they're not talking about religion. I'm using this to talk about religion, but the identities they explore are in particular, and I just want to be sort of talk within my line here and talk about, what did the study cover, what didn't it cover, and how can we use the study to build theory. So the particular identities that they talked about verifying, I think were it was weird. It was like a Democrat was one, um, friend, friend identity, romantic identity, worker identity, and family identity um, were the most difficult for participants to identify. And they make this scientifically accurate. So, or not accurate. That's not the right word. They make this generalizable by surveying a ton of different people. So about 50-50 men and women, 20% Asian, 20% Black. That's actually more than the population levels. A quarter Hispanic, a third non-Hispanic white people. 41% of the people they interviewed were low income. So it's really a wide demographic. And so we can use this data. What that means is we can use this data. Hi, Tunji. Um, we can think about how this data refers more broadly to the population, at least in the United States. And so some of these people reported having difficulty with identity verification before the pandemic. About a third of the people, I think they said, that they surveyed. And Cassandra. So some of the people had difficulty before the pandemic, but most of the difficulty took place after. And so they're showing the relationship between emotions and identity non-verification. And so the point that I really think that we can derive from this article, what I want to derive from it, is now that we have this sort of proof of concept of the relationship between my feelings and my coping strategy and identity non-verification, like I want to think about, well, how does that apply to all the people who've kind of told me their stories about leaving their religion? And I'm thinking about that. I think it really matches up with the enemy, the sense of meaninglessness and nihilism that people told me about as they were leaving their religion. I'm reading some of this in Ross Douthat's book, which, thank you, Dawn, told me how to. I think maybe I'm pronouncing his name right now. Douthat, the New York Times columnist who publishes with Zondervan now. Let's talk about that. But he's written this book that I've talked about before, where he's talking about, well, how can I make a blueprint of meaning, or blueprint describing his own religious belief and the importance that he's found in religious belief, and how can he create that maybe diagram for other people. That's what he's doing in that book. But in doing that, he's talking a little bit about his own conversion experience. And so, and I wonder about the emotions there. Like, I think that's something that so far in that book, I haven't heard him talking about, but maybe I wonder it's part of the story. And so that brought me to, I've been reading William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, and I'm almost to the part where he's talking about conversion. And he's someone who's really going to dig into the emotional side of things, which I was thinking about reading some more of. I don't know if that really fits the vibe of this article stream, but we can totally read more of that, and I might. Okay, so just to recap, I'm using this new finding from Stets and Burke to talk about the relationship between identity non-verification in religion and emotion. And I'm seeing, and I think I can see in my data now, maybe part of what's going on with this nihilism and this anomie is identity non-verification. And I think that because so many people have this point in their stories, this feeling of betrayal, this feeling of anger. And so as I'm thinking about those particular emotions, what Stets and Burke find is actually really interesting in their discussion. And I should have highlighted this because I really wanted to kind of think about the particular emotions. So I will do a quick search for anger, I think was the most important thing that they were talking about here. One of the more important ones. I'm going to see if I can find where they talk about anger, so I can read to you some of the. Okay. They say people may feel anger following identity non-verification, perhaps because they think that others are responsible for them not being verified. This is an external attribution in which they deny responsibility for the identity non-verification. Okay, bullshit. That's their previous. They're citing the previous work. This is all literature. This is nothing that they found this time. I wish we could all read this together. Wouldn't this be fun? So I really want to get to their findings section where they actually talk about this in the discussion section, actually. Okay, so they say shame is a negative feeling that is directed inward. Persons evaluate themselves as bad and they want to flee, hide, or withdraw from others. And they offer citation there. It is an internal attribution that one is responsible for a non-verifying outcome. So as I'm thinking about this, I also want to think about, well, there's some traditions that really have kind of a shame-based thinking and way of enforcing things. And so it's that part seems really important. And then there's a place in here where they talk about, well, these negative emotions are really leading to different negative coping strategies. And so, yeah, I don't know if this makes sense to anyone, but this is just kind of what I'm thinking about right now. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and see if anybody has just any thoughts about this generally. Because I do have some time. And if nobody jumps in, I'm going to read some more William James. So let me set the link up here. Okay, I have provided a link for us. Wow, somebody's naked. Thank you, Griswold Grum. The topic is identity verification. Experiences that you might have had with your religion. Do you buy this idea that there's a connection between my identity? How do I perform in the outside world? How do people respond to me with my identity? Maybe people don't accept my Christian identity as Christian, or my non-religious identity. Maybe that doesn't seem authentic. How does that affect your emotions? Is this psychological bullshit, or is there some truth to it? Or, your favorite flavor of ice cream is always fair game. I had some really good chocolate ice cream the other day. There's a UDF a little bit too close to my house. I will say I will now follow through with my promise to read more William James. So this is from The Varieties of Religious Experience. Yesterday, I started reading The Divided Self, which personally, I got a little bored when I was reading that, but then on sort of the playback, it occurred to me, like, wow, this is really sounding a lot like Halakhic Man. This is sounding a lot like, some of the stuff in the AA literature that actually was kind of derived from William James. And it started to seem a lot more familiar and chill. So I left off in the middle of this lecture on the divided self. And then I was reading it this morning and I was like, wow, actually, there's some good stuff that I left behind. So I'm going to read from that. So he was talking about St. Augustine and Aline both emerged into the smooth waters of inner unity and peace. And he starts talking about this processual sort of thing that's happening as people are getting unity. Cassandra's asking, could you compare this to cognitive dissonance? Yeah, I think that there's sort of a case that's kind of what's happening. Maybe is that when people get that negative response from identity non-verification, yeah, there might be some cognitive dissonance happening. Griswold Grimm is in the house, and I'm going to add him to the stage. How are you doing, Griswold Grimm?
That's not the topic. The topic is like why you feel shame when your identity doesn't get verified. And it's because, at least for some demographic groups, it meant that exile in the winter meant you died. Because, it's psychologically encoded with survival mechanisms that you get negative emotions when your identity isn't verified.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. That's a good evolutionary argument.
But you want people to talk about their feelings? What?
Yeah, talk about your feelings.
No. I'm gonna go get some more coffee. Bring me back after.
Okay, okay. I'm gonna bring you back after. Um, yes, classic Grum. I too would like a cup of coffee. I'm drinking tea today. Hot tea. Pretty good, pretty good. Um, I do recommend. What made it similar to Halakhic Man? I saw a similarity between William James's chapter, "The Divided Self," or his lecture in the Gifford series, on Halakhic Man, because he's talking about this divided self. And I was reading this morning. He uses a language of born once and born twice, which is that's a whole chapter that needs to be described. But the big similarity that I saw is this difference between mind and body, the separation between mind and body. And so it's been a while since I read Halakhic Man. I'd have to review specifically, but this connection between mind and body seems so important in both. So that was the connection that I saw. Cassandra asks, "What's my favorite tea?" That depends on the moment. I really like a good jasmine green tea. Personally. I'm gonna make Grim come back because he said he would.
Yeah, I'm back.
So we were talking about collective shame that happens because of this evolutionary need for survival.
No, you would die if you didn't fit in. So, and yeah, it's in there. That's why it generates those negative emotions.
Yeah, I see that.
But what was your paper's angle? This article research thing you wanted to talk. What was their angle?
They didn't really explain why it happens, at least in the part that I read. They more explained that it's a real thing, and they were doing a study to prove that it does happen.
I always love that science that confirms common sense. That's the best kind. Yeah.
It was kind of the thought that I had when I was reading this, which is kind of mean because, these people develop their own branch of whatever, but
apparently the science had not yet been done to prove it. Everybody, people got to fill in all the details. That's part of it. That's part of being thorough.
Yeah,
it's good to be thorough.
Got to do your due diligence. Yeah, Tunji didn't believe in you, actually. Have you got a card there for me? Are you got
for
some?
You? I mean, I will cut and show one. Tunji's been like the only person so far to psychically guess what the card's going to be.
Oh, he's here. Should I ask him?
He heard that, and so now he's already psychically guessed this card here, which is the 3 of Spades, which may be the card it was last time when he guessed it. I don't know. We'd have to. People don't get enough clips. There's not enough rewards incentives to be a Reaper, I guess.
I guess.
There's not enough people play along. We should have that on tap.
Tunji says again. It must be the same one again.
Was it, Tunji? Did you already know it was the 3 of Spades? That's such a camera penalty, dude. Your eyes belong at the 2/3 mark of the screen. You're a rebel. Open rebellion of common decency. And you're muted. I don't know if that's on purpose.
Is it my fault? Do I have to unmute him?
He should be able.
I don't know why the audio is not coming in for me from StreamYard.
Now is it? You don't hear us.
I don't know why the audio is not coming.
You just heard yourself on your YouTube. I heard your mic pick that up.
Yeah, if I turn up YouTube, I will have feedback.
It's true.
So, sounds like you can hear me then. To address what I say.
I think it's a StreamYard problem. There must be a lag because he can hear it on YouTube but not StreamYard.
Well, in case it's my fault.
That's a Chris Walker move right there. Like, oh, I can make an exit, so I will. Are you well, Tunji? Not working for you?
Yeah, give me 1 second to fix my input output.
Cassandra says your color grading is F. That's mean. I'm gonna give you at least a D plus. Clint's in the house. The voting has reduced his desire to reap clips, which makes sense to me. I think it's just more work if you have to vote on things.
We're back. We made
Yes.
it.
Hurrah!
It was my headphones, they were bugging for some reason. It was not your fault, it was not Grim Gray's fault. It was me.
Well, I'm glad it works now. You got to be able to listen to your music if nothing else.
Yeah, good topic. I was thinking if you consider this conversation about religious identity, verification, and shame in the context of the change in religious identity technologies, like from authenticity to propheticity, and even if not on that side, still on a societal philosophical level, the change. So I mean, apart from the internet identity theory, even apart from that, how fluid identities in the, let's call it, in the more postmodern frame of reference, has also entered the general conversation about identities.
Sure.
So the I don't know if you have a thought on that direction, because for once the losing of your religion is not a new thing. It's not deconstruction even is not something that was invented in 2016 or 2002.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly the language has changed, and has changed in parallel with a technological aspect, like from authenticity to propheticity. And it has changed in the same way that the idea of identities has changed in the culture, where it is not something that is given, or more on a more fundamental level, is what it is. That's the ontological tautology. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But it is now what you make for on one way,
Mm-hmm.
or what you are affirmed on. So identity is nothing without the what a specific group confirm and affirm of you.
Yeah.
So that has entered the conversation in the region as well, and has made all this well, the pure religion conversation has been made more difficult, for once.
Yeah.
Because there are now there is confusion, there is ambiguity between an identity that was given and now is negotiated on different levels. So you are negotiating now your religious identity with your religious group, and it may sound like, okay, but this is something that has always been there. Well, not really, or not really in the way that is now done as it is any other identities. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think you made some really important points. The especially I sort of latched on to maybe two sort of things as the fluidity of identity, which I think is changing in a way that this article in particular, the Stets and Burke that I've been talking about, since they're so adamant on capturing this quantitative approach to identity, I don't think they can capture that fluidity, because the truth is that at one moment in time, I might have one identity, and another moment in time, I might feel differently.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, that's like a little critique I would have of.
Yeah,
you know,
but that's the aspect that I like of it is that, for instance, on the internal side of a Christian, let's say, there is a very normal and legitimate questioning of how good of a Christian I am. You know, am I good Christian, or am I bad Christian? Am I very bad Christian? You know, that's inevitable. You know, that's kind of part of the course, and hopefully you go in the right direction if that's your belief. You want to be a good Christian and not a mediocre one.
Sure.
But on a fundamental level, the question is not, and that's very important. Is not if am I a Christian or not a Christian. No? So that quantity is not on the substantial level. Is on the level of your action, workings, and operation. So it's not what you are, but what you do. So what you do can always increase, improve, and be better. It can be perfected. But when it comes to identity, what you are is what you are. You either are or you are not. So this is more in line with some classical idea that is very much rejected in large, if you accept that it's not your operations that are on a spectrum and fluid, but your identity itself is fluid. So you can be 50% something and 50% something else, and that's any other given day. You can it can be different, you know. But that's a very, very different, let's call it metaphysics from the other one. So I don't know if that's at this point a complicated argument to present or to grasp, or is not.
Yeah. So I think it's coming down to, in my understanding, for you, it's coming down to this sort of, can you be a Christian or not? Is there a spectrum of being a Christian? Is that what you're? And I don't know if I'm.
Well,
sort of
no.
Luke is saying the same thing.
On theory, the fundamental thing is that you are either a Christian or you are not a Christian. But there is an infinite spectrum between a good Christian and a bad Christian, obviously. So you can be a saint and you can be very, very messed up one. But in the same way, that you can maybe talking about human being, not fundamentally a man, but a human being. You cannot be more or less a human being. From the moment of conception, you are a human being. You are 100% fully a human being. But of course, well, you don't see a fetus doing the same things that a grown-up person does. And that person is he has the capacity to perfect all his own actions and aspect of the self. The person is perfecting itself. You can become a better sociologist, a great sociologist. You can become whatever, you know, a mother, a grandmother. It's a million of things that you are going to grow into, improve, being the best at it, or abandon. But that will not make any of us more of a human being. You are 100% a human being, and you will always be. There's
Mhm.
no. So if you apply that to all other so-called identities, you see where the issue lies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you kind of get into the hierarchy sort of thing. It's like maybe it's a question of, where is this particular identity on your identity salience hierarchy, to drop a Stets and Burkeism. But Tunji, I want to hear more about that, but I also want to pick up the prophilicity thread. So
Yeah,
wherever you want to go.
that's the parallel one. Yes.
Yeah. Did you have more to say about that, or do you want to?
Yeah, the aspect of it is that it has to do with the identity verification. That's where really the technology has revolutionized the world. That verification is open to the world. It's the internet. Is everyone having the reach of the whole world, literally, and then it's a voluntary. You're putting yourself there voluntarily, and you are at the same time being validated and validating other in the same platform. So it has to do also with the universal democratization of identities. It's another anti-hierarchical move where let's say the power of verification is divided for every individual that is present there. So it's not a monarchy anymore. It's a democracy where every likes is the same. One person, one likes. That's democracy, and my likes is worth as much as yours.
Yeah,
relatively speaking, when in the platform when it is applied anonymously, and that's mostly how those metrics works. They are anonymous. Your like is not visible.
I was just so struck today, Tunji, by this change in profile. And I'm sorry, I think I cut you off there.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just struck by this change to this maybe prophilicity dominant culture, because I clicked on this YouTube video, and it was this woman explaining she had previously been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So she had been like a really faithful Mormon, and she had sort of had talked about like, and I looked at her channel, like she has done a lot of these videos where she was like exposing the church, but this was like a new video where she was really exposing the temple ceremony of the church, which is one of the most sacred sort of Mormon ceremonies. And she was talking about like what went wrong there. And people have told me this same story probably 50 times, in private, doing private face-to-face kind of interviews or online interviews. This story of like leaving the church and feeling betrayed and these kinds of things. But then to see it online and just reflected, oh, this video is like 1 million views and so forth. And just that could be published. It was just so striking to me, just the massive change and how that changed her presentation of the narrative, and how that like I don't know if this is sort of ringing, if this resonates at all, but like how she was presenting this new identity of like ex-Mormon, I guess, just in contrast to these stories of people that I told, like, or that I'd heard from, like on a like a sort of a face-to-face level. I don't know. It was just really striking.
Yeah, that on that level there is it's more than that. That's the problem. It's much more than that. It's not that the reach of your experience that has radically changed. It's not just that. Otherwise, it will not be what it is. So it's like, okay, now I share my experience with these 50, 100, maybe 1,000 people of my community. Now my experience is visible to millions. It's not just like that. It's an identity technology because you are validated by that's not the difference. You are validated by the other members of the group, as always. That's not the difference. So that feedback loop, that validation feedback loop, is it's what is maintained. It's constant through ages, through societies. But now you are. What is happening that that validation is based upon not who you really are, but what are you presenting of yourself into the platform. This is the sacred self, and the breaching of the self is according to what is your persona, what is your profile. Is the profile that is sacred, and you have a particular flexibility in what you can present of yourself and what you can do. So this is what you have to betray. So if you present yourself as a super holy kind of Christian, for instance, it's the most devout person who ever lives. I posting how many hours per day you pray and read the Bible, maybe the miracles that you do, between breakfast and lunch, and you present that on to be seen, and then something is come up, is visible that you are a little bit less than that. You're just
a little scandal.
You're focusing there. So that is the breach of the truth of your identity. That's what it's between what you were presenting on the internet and what you were actually doing. If you don't present any of that, that does not never going to apply to you. That validation loop is not what you are going to be judged for, because there wasn't your personal participation to it. You didn't give yourself up to that presentation of identity.
Yeah, I think I follow you there. There's such wisdom, Tunji. I feel a little richer, hearing Tunji talk. I'm like, he's a smart one here. How you doing, Michael?
Oh, pretty good. So just kind of try to figure out, clarify some of the things here. So, I mean, I guess like in the religious context, is this more or less describing an experience where somebody claims an identity, and then that identity is being rejected by others? Like if someone was to say, like, I'm a Christian, and then the other people say you're not a Christian, or is it more in like their decision to say, like, if these people are Christian, I don't want to identify with them anymore? Like, I guess because the context was those other things like friendship and work and stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's more neutral, Michael. And I didn't mean to misrepresent the article here, but it's more neutral. It's like, I have this thought of myself, say, I think I'm a Christian. You think I'm a Christian, and maybe I try to sort of live my life like maybe read my Bible or whatever. But maybe one day I get distracted from my Bible reading, and so I think, oh, maybe I'm not as much of a Christian, or maybe I'm the example they gave in the text was, oh, I'm a worker, but if I'm working from home because it's COVID, like maybe that interferes with my family identity because I have to be at work instead of with my family. Yeah. So I think maybe sort of more of the former, but in like a neutral sort of way. Like, I'm getting less feedback from my colleagues because I'm working from home. So maybe I feel like less of a worker. Or like I can't get into a Bible study that I really mesh with. So maybe I feel like, I don't have that strongest feeling of a Christian, or I'm struggling to get that Christian identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder if people identify those feelings and then, because certainly I can relate to those experiences, and as a process of maturation, you kind of decide what of those feelings to ignore, or how to get around it through other means of verification and things like that. But yeah, because I'm assuming it's what's her name there, Alyssa Grenfell, is that the one, the Mormon lady that
Oh, that video. Maybe it was.
yeah,
I don't know if my YouTube
blonde
history is on.
haired lady.
Yeah, she did this really big expose like 7 months ago of like the temple ceremony and
Yeah.
Grenfell. And I had done all these interviews and I never like found her before. Yeah, oh yeah, that's it. That's it. And my algorithm just knew.
I covered some of her one of her videos, but it is kind of funny because I feel like there's that mechanism that gets people like out of their position, and I think maybe it's subconscious, but they are very reticent to apply that same mechanism to whatever environment they end up in afterwards. Like rarely do you see someone who is applying all these tools of deconstruction to their faith attempt to apply those same tools of deconstruction to like whatever secular materialism or something like that. Even though if you did, you could probably find just as many kind of reasons to critique it. And I think really similar also when people go from like one, maybe they go out of the church and then back into another, and they kind of, it's like you kind of know like as Paul talks about, once you see how the sausage is made, and then you go to another restaurant and you decide, I'm not gonna try to find out how the sausage is made. I'm just gonna enjoy the meal. Like, so it's a kind of way to protect yourself from those challenges to identity verification or.
Yeah, I think that's the other part that maybe as is even more important, that there is a two-way street between the profile of the individual and the profile of the community, let's say the church, whatever. Because most of the deconstruction I am here as anecdotally, let's say, is not a breaking of the profile of the individual, but is the individual that find out that it's the community that was breaking the propheticity code. So the community was not what they thought that they were, or they fall short of the image that they were presenting publicly. So that's very much the spark that the first domino that fall down. But again, that's why probably we have this language of deconstruction now, as opposed to the old frame of simply, losing one's faith or moving away from their community. It's because there is a breaking of a system of identity that now is based on what it is presented to others. So it's not simply what it is, and then how it's done can be good or bad. Now it is what is presented, and if there is a mismatch, the whole things fall apart.
And I mean, I think we're saying more and more of like when you say mismatch, are you thinking of like, well, there's the clergy sex abuse scandals, and then there's no, not what you're thinking. Okay, you're thinking about the individual presentation, not the collective presentation.
Well, with the scandals, they have always been there, and the scandals is a scandal because by definition it was cause people to stumble, what caused people to fall away. That's really the definition of the scandal, and they're always been there. But that wasn't a conversation about identities. never was a problem of identities.
Mm.
Even in the scandals, the church was the church, and the Christian was were the Christians.
Mhm.
Somebody
It's
could be, yeah, could be
it's
chased away, but it's not a problem of identities.
Mm.
it seems like what, and probably it's because we are also thinking about, like, maybe if somebody's identified, so if you're trying to figure out what it means to be a Christian and that's part of your identity, then you're very interested in seeing how that label plays out in the lives of others. And I feel like I've heard way more people not so much troubled about a scandal, because like we do understand that scandals happen, but
Mhm.
the thing that really tends to cause people trouble is the response to scandal by like other leaders, because if there's like cover-ups and stuff like that, because and I guess that's just to say, like, anything that's deceptive is confusing towards the whole concept of identity. I mean, unless if you're like in a, I don't know, like a gang of tricksters or like con men or something, like then the deception is kind of like baked in. But for the most part, that's going to cause dissonance.
Yeah, that's why hypocrisy has always been the principal critique of religious systems. It's presenting something other than what is done or what is believed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to really dovetail with a lot of what John Verbake's been talking about lately in regard to like credibility, and how credibility enhancing displays shape people's beliefs. Because the more someone's actions line up with the things they espouse, the more secure not only their identity is going to be, but the people following them and looking up to them and stuff.
Yeah, I will just avoid to insist on the language of identity when talking about that the whole matter, because it's not a problem of identity. I would like
Yeah.
to specify the things are either are or are not, and in as much they are, you can do it good or bad. So normally the struggle and the presentation of it and the encouragement is, let's do it good, and let's do good together, and let's grow together in doing good. It's not let's be more what we are, because that's not the right framework. It's you if you admit that there is this fluidity of identity, then you are kind of making the case that it is you who determine who you are ultimately, and that's another foundational issue, is that who is that to determine who you are? Is it you yourself? Is it the community where you are in, or is God? I will argue that is God. And
That's a little different from identity verification theory.
yeah, that's the issue, because the identity verification theory, it's only possible if identity is negotiated. It's something that can be negotiated either within the individual and the individual and the community. But I would argue that that's not how identity works. That's not what identity is. Identity is given, so there is nothing to negotiate about.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I see where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, I think there's certainly, and it's not to say like this is the basis of ultimate reality or something, but the way that people tend to figure this stuff out and understand it, I mean, it is a process of negotiation, like from becoming like an infant to an adult. You're you're, and even that's even like with the pro-felicity thing, with the thing on the internet, like the feedback that you get shapes the direction you're going to go, because ultimately the people that have the most success, it's not because they're doing a particular thing, it's because they have, it's some combination of being the right person and doing the right things that they're suited to. But we have way less, or we have way more things that are, I guess you could say, treated as negotiable than in former ages and times when it comes to identity.
Well, I will repeat myself. If it is an identity, is not negotiable. The example of the person, you can become, and you should become a better person, but you cannot become more of a human being than what you already are when you were conceived. You achieved 100% of human beingness. That's a human being, 100%. You cannot become more of it, but you can become a better person in wherever you put your mind to. The same with the Christianity things. Once you are a Christian, well, can you really become more of a Christian? Not really. You can become more Christ-like, or you can become a much better Christian. You can become a saint or whatever. And that has to do with what you do. And what you do is not the same of what you are.
And if I just to be a nerd here, and then just to sort of drive that in the direction of identity theory, you could say that matches the theory if you think about like the more and more Christian things you do, matching who you are, you'll get more feedback, more identity verification feedback if what you do matches your community's definition of your identity. So if you're identifying as Christian and your church says to be Christian, you have to do X, Y, Z, and you're able to do that, then your identity verification will line up and you'll have those more positive emotions. But if your church says, do this in order to be a Christian, and you have a disagreement with that or something like that, or that doesn't sit right with you and you don't feel like you can do that, then you have this mismatch between, and I want to know what you think about this. I'm not just trying to argue. I want to know what you think. But if your church says, well, give money to this cause, or, do X, Y, and Z in order to be a good Christian, and you want to be a good Christian, but you can't do those things, you have this mismatch. You get those negative emotions, you get that shame. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Of course, there is that mechanism in place, but I would argue that is not an identity verification per se. That will be a misnomer. You are verifying it's the quality. It's not questioning if you are a Christian or not. It's questioning if you are a good Christian or not, a good Christian according to the standard of that particular community. Because every community will have its own standard, and those standards are not standard of identity, they are standard of quality, goodness, how good you are doing the Christianity things, how good you are Christianing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, okay, so obviously there's aspects of identity that are kind of like immutable or whatever. You're not changing into a different person, but then there is a negotiated aspect of it, as not necessarily as what our identity is, but as our identity is perceived by others and how it's portrayed. And in that way, it could be that, like, if I could really, there's certain things I could do to strengthen my identity as like a good, well-loved member in my church. But some of those things might be, but it might be a different set of criteria to exactly like what God wants me to do or something. So, and then it's almost,
David kind of addresses this too in his comment. Not to interrupt.
Yeah, and so, and that's even sometimes, where it's like, you get that thing maybe because it's like if your reason for not conforming to other people's expectations is rooted in like your relationship with God and that you've prayed about it and you've read the scripture and you're convinced that you're right, then you get that thing where their like negative reaction actually reinforces your identity. I don't know if they really cover that in the paper at all, but that's certainly, there is that thing where negative feedback tends to strengthen people's assumptions. Like,
Yeah, like maybe if they're operating within sort of the frame, if it verifies the fact that you are a member of that congregation or that you are a Christian or whatever verification that you need, if somebody's taking the time to give you feedback, yeah, I could see. Is that what you mean? That would
Yeah.
verify your
Well,
identity.
or I mean, or like, okay, if my perception of my own identity is like I'm the smartest guy around, and then like people say like, oh, you're so smart, and then like I can be like, yes, I received that boost to my identity. But then somebody else says, I think you're wrong. Then I say, no, well, no, I'm actually smarter than you. And so then it's like, it's delusional or whatever, maybe but you take that negative feedback and you interpret it.
That's the problem, Michael. That's because I think it's very difficult to break out of that theory of identity now. But regarding your smartness, you are as smart as you are smart. Your smartness is not your perception of how smart you are, and then you have to then negotiate or then prove or disprove the idea of your own perception with others, because that's not how smart you are. That's just how you feel or perceive that your intelligence compared to others. Your identity as smart person is what it is. That's not is not even what you perceive of it. So you can negotiate the perception of it. You can profile it to appear better than it is, or hide it, but that's not what it is. That's just the presentation or the perception of it.
Yeah, but that does affect how the feedback that you received affects you, as far as
Sure,
because that was some of it. The shame.
course.
Are you getting shame? And I would I would just think in some ways that the failure of others to identify people properly leads to shame and or confusion about those things, like, so, and then you have self-doubt or whatever. I mean, that's just like it's just a strange thing, because obviously like the most delusional person in the world has very strong feelings about their own identity, and like,
yeah, but to bring another pieces, because that's also one part of the system, of the theory, where this has changed in recent years. All this conversation that we are having, and then people deconstruct or don't are having, it was an ethical conversation. All of this will fall under the bridge, the umbrella of ethics. Ethics is what you do, is what you will. Is it good or is it bad? It's a conversation about ethics. It's your action good, obedient, proper, appropriate, fitting, or is not. So that was the category of all this conversation taking place. So, and when you judge others, you are also, what are you actually judged of other people? Well, you are judging what they do. You are judging their action. This is a ethical kind of discussion at all levels. Now, what happened with postmodernity too is that we run away about having conversation about ethics, because ethics doesn't exist anymore. There is not such a thing as good and bad, because there is nothing that can actually give us a standard or a principle by which we can decide. It's all the good and bad is also negotiated amongst individual inside and outside and community. It's all a negotiation. So what was before a discussion about ethics now is it can be very well a discussion about identity. Why? Because they are all of that is just things that we are negotiating between each other, and their validity, they stand and fall on the basis of personal or community approvals.
Hmm.
Hi,
Yeah,
Neil.
that's why I think it's
Hey,
good
Clara.
to spend some time doing something with your hands. It's much more easily verifiable, your success. It gives you a little bit of an anchor for reality.
It felt like Clara was outnumbered by the guys, so I joined to even the odds.
Neil.
I'm not sure how that. I'm glad everyone's here.
Doing great.
Maybe one direction we could add, and unless Neil had something in particular. If we want to add a direction, oh, beards and not beards. I got it. That's great. Ethan in the house.
That works.
One direction to add would be to think about. I don't know where the feedback's coming from. I hope it's not me. Would be to think about this, and I think you all are kind of addressing it without talking about it. Is this identity, whether it's sort of an internally felt identity, like maybe Christian, I think would be an identity that you kind of in post-modernity decide on for yourself, versus a role-based identity like mother or teacher or sister or brother, or and versus like when do they become real or not real. Nico was kind of addressing this, so I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this, because like this has really become, I think, part of Tunji's thinking.
Am I causing the echo when I'm on?
No, it's there whether you're on or not.
Keep going.
I just didn't, because I was thinking about Tunji, what Tunji was saying. The echo went away, so whoever did it, Tunji was saying about God gives you your identity, and it's not up for negotiation. But then we also have these role-based identities, which Stets and Burke talk a lot about, not in this article, and these other identities. So I'm just sort of curious whether that changes the conversation at all. And I might have 10 or 15 more minutes.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, some identities are definitely inherited, and at least in our conventional society, there are still some identities that seem unchangeable. Like, for example, your racial identity seems unchangeable from a societal perspective. Although it does seem negotiable with mixed race, which is interesting. Yeah, and I caught what Tunji was talking about earlier, like we're all human, or if you're born with a disability, but then also on the borders of disability, like what's a disability versus what's simply being like a standard deviation in any given trait different than the norm. So it's those borders that are still fuzzy and being negotiated. I do think the answer that you're actually pointing to the answer, Clara, with role-based identity, because the problem as I see it is that if we define our identities based on how others are treating us, then it's almost like a slave-based identity. Man, that's the wrong word, but like then you're beholden. But seriously, you're beholden then to whatever the outside world is doing to you. You could say you're beholden. So like, if you take Joseph as a sorry, I'm going back to Genesis, like Joseph as a Jew in Egypt, like what was his identity? You know, because he was surrounded by Egyptians, and he was actually pretty high up in the Egyptian hierarchy at one point. But was he an Egyptian? Was he a Jew? Was his identity political? But he was still like a quote unquote a slave. But I think what was different about Joseph was that his identity was ultimately determined by his own actions and his own beliefs that were, let's say, inward out, culminating in his capacity or ability to suffer and ultimately die if that was God's will. That wasn't God's will for Joseph, but like you got that sense of his acceptance of his identity in whatever external circumstances he was in, through the will of God, through whatever difficulty he would endure. Like all of this was intended by God, and therefore I accept. And so I do think of that as the answer, in that if it's not that we're not affected by the external, but if we have our anchoring in something that's beyond the now, beyond the circumstantial, and that could be, I really love the AA God as You Understand Him, because basically what AA does is it says, like, you can define your anchor, but like you have to be subordinate to an anchor. It can be your choice what that anchor is that's you're subordinate to, but then you have to be subordinate to something more than your own desires, you could say, more than like right here, right now, what do I want? And only when you give up control to that anchor, then suddenly you receive an inheritance identity that seems more liberating than you actually choosing whatever seems liberating in the moment, which is a very ironic thing. But the role-based stuff, it's like, am I a father because 50% of my genetic material went into the creation of a child, or am I a father because of my responsibilities and the things I actually practice in my day-to-day life towards my daughter? And I think more and more, I think the realization of the postmodern problem and the identity crisis, and underneath all of that is nihilism, like underneath all of it. And so more and more I realize, like, the answer to the nihilism is like the voluntary subordination of like the self to these role-based identities. Like I voluntarily say, like, I am an employee. I voluntarily say, like, I am a husband. I voluntarily say I'm a father, etc. And only through that voluntary, like it has to be inward out, basically. And then only through that, somehow it actually creates something that's real. Because the imaginal and the real and the identity is very interesting, because every identity has to start out in the imaginal. Sorry, every role-based identity that's taken on really has to start in the imaginal. Because a mother has to conceive of herself as a mother before she can accept that role. And the same thing for the father. It's like so the father could say, like, oh, I'm getting out of here because I cannot conceive of myself as a father. I'm out. Like that's dangerous. That's scary. Yeah, a lot of thoughts.
Is it just a problem with the paper that it uses the word identity? Does it suddenly make a lot more sense if you just change it to like community roles or something instead of like, because I mean we're trying to is it supposed to like, is because I don't think the paper was trying to identify like what is the the definition of identity in some permanent way. So
you are correct, Mike.
That was my bad. I should have engaged. There is a very technical definition of identity that's being used in the surveys and stuff, and so I should have engaged that.
But I think a lot of it is not role-based still. Like a lot of it still is not role-based in that.
Yeah, but
you don't choose the family or the country that like I can't identify as being like Italian and then have Italian citizenship,
Yeah, I want to just repeat my point because I understand it's difficult to get out of the normal frame. If it is an identity, is what it is. If it is negotiable, then we are not talking about identity anymore. We are talking about it's what we are doing is not what we are. At the same time, just because an identity is given doesn't mean that is eternally mutable and unchangeable. It has nothing to do with that. If you believe that human life ends at death, then a human is not a human anymore when it dies. It's not something eternal. I am a Christian. God forbid I could not be a Christian at some point. God forbid. But it's not that that identity is just because it's a given. It's immutable, and those apply to all other things that we call identity. And with the roles, the less, let's say, relevant can be a role, or less central to one's person that role is, the more fuzzy are the border of that. The more you can fall in and out of it, in a way. But still, if it is an identity, if I am a carpenter, I can be a good carpenter, I can be a bad carpenter, but I'm still a carpenter. Regardless of how poorly I do my job, I am a carpenter. I can stop working for the rest of my life, but still, if I am a carpenter, I'm a carpenter. Then that doesn't mean that is at some point I can decide, okay, I will change my job and I will change my life. But that's not the negotiation of identity. It's just the quality of the role and the way that you are doing your role. You're performing. It's the performance of it.
If
Well,
I'm
yeah. Oh, I was
I
going to
just
say,
wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Well, I just want to understand, Tunji, if I'm a carpenter on, say, like Monday, if I decide at some point in time that I'm going to take up blacksmithing and leave behind carpentry, would you say that I'm still a carpenter? I've just added blacksmithing and it's higher in my salience hierarchy? Or
You were a carpenter, now you are a blacksmith, but you were a carpenter.
Okay.
So that's an identity that was fixed in time and space to that.
This is really interesting because if you think of the history of surname, like family names, like Smith, or Smith is the obvious one that comes up, like Miller. Miller is another one. Yeah, so the surnames are tied to your profession. Patel, the reason Patel is such a common Indian last name is Patel means farmer. That's what it means.
I was just going to say, for my parents, late or adult converts to Christianity, made it very clear that they wanted us to just as children to discover our identity in Christ. They made that part really important. They were less instructive on helping my siblings and I figure out our community roles, I would say. And so in that regard, like, my identity is secure, but the feedback mechanism is interesting because that's also an important part of life. Even if it's not a central aspect of my identity. So, for what it's worth.
wait, what feedback mechanism?
The whole thing of how shame and how the feedback from your success or failure in those various roles helps you figure out those things. Like I'm saying, if we're going to say not identity in like a metaphysical sense, but your community role as a friend or a worker or whatever, that in that aspect, how affirmation or rejection shapes that is interesting and helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is really cool. I really love hearing so many different sort of perspectives. And I hope this is going to help me teach someday, because now that I see how so many different people respond to identity, like, that forces some analytical clarity. Like, you need to know.
One thing that I think is particularly interesting about the United States, maybe there are other countries in the West like this, but I think the United States is interesting in that it places the authenticity identity at the forefront over sincerity, meaning that every other country in its founding that I know of has more of a sincerity founding. China is China because it's China. Russia is Russia because it's Russia, etc. India is India because it's India. And in the United States, we place like that pursuit of, well, we call it happiness, but it's really the pursuit of authenticity at the very center of our credo. I was thinking that in some ways, with the postmodern moment and like the fracturing of identities, that you might think that it makes the US even more highly susceptible to it, which is probably true. But on the other hand, it's something that the US has been, the spirit of the United States has had to contend with that fracturing for as long as its founding. So it's nothing new. Maybe the intensity has gone up. And so I think to myself, like, do we have the same uniting narratives that we had even 10 or 15 years ago? Like the last big one that I think was truly a uniting story was Harry Potter. Like, I think that was like a universal, even Clara, right? It's like a universal,
Even Clara.
Like it's truly a universal uniting story for let's say the Western culture.
I've been rereading Harry Potter this summer now, I'll confess.
Yeah. And so I think in that reading, Clara, most likely, and I'm sure this is true, like you have a yearning for unity, for harmony, for bringing the diversity into a unity of some cohesive form for some greater purpose. But I think that is the dream of the United States. And I'm not saying that like the United States doesn't have its dark moments, but like it tends to rise to the occasion when pushed. So, yeah.
I'm just over here looking at my Harry Potter cover. Proof I got it off the shelf.
Goblet of Fire is the best one, in my opinion.
It was really rich, really fun to read, This has been really fun. I hate to cut it short. I want to give everybody a chance at a last word, but then I really have to go. So who has some last thoughts? Anybody?
It is what it is.
Wow, that's a Tunji for you. Wow, very.
That doesn't mean that things don't change.
I'm going to say the secret to a happy identity is the reverse of prophylicity. That's the secret. So,
wow.
Leave it at that.
Anything from you, Michael?
Yeah. No, because I don't want to argue with Neil for an amount of time that we don't have.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks for joining. We'll do another one next Monday. See you all.
Bye.
Bye.